Welcome to PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Caitlin Rose-Seiler, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Today, Kevin Steinley of Swift Current Creek Watershed Stewards and Stephanie Huel of Moose Jaw River Watershed Stewards will be speaking about a watershed stewardship approach to invasive species education and management. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. Before we begin, I'd like to note that PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series is a monthly presentation about anything to do with Native Prairie conservation or species at risk. We have an awesome lineup of presenters coming up this winter. On March 2nd, the Alberta Invasive Species Council will be presenting about their biocontrol release program. And join us on April 7th for a webinar by Environment and Climate Change Canada about tracking and monitoring terns in Saskatchewan. You can register for these webinars on the PCAP website, and all past webinars can be found on the PCAP YouTube channel, and this webinar will be uploaded there in the near future. And a reminder to all of our listeners out there, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type into the questions section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation. If you are on a cell phone, you can just send your question by chat to the organizer, and questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. I'd like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, Eco-Friendly Sask, Enbridge, Information Services Corporation, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, SaskTel, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. Now a bit about today's presenters. Kevin Steinley is the Executive Director of the Swift Current Creek Watershed Stewards. He has been in that role since May of 2016. Kevin holds a degree in agriculture, majoring in animal science from the University of Saskatchewan, and is a professional agrologist. Kevin has over 30 years of experience in agri-business, helping producers get the most out of their operations. In addition to his role as executive director, Kevin and his brother and family operate a cow-calf operation specializing in producing Hereford Angus F1 bred females that sell in a sale every December. The farm also has a large holding of flood irrigated land in the Rush Lake Irrigation Project. Kevin's interest in watershed stewardship comes from his experience with the irrigation and cattle operations, how water quality and quantity affect hay production and cattle performance, and working to ensure that all users have access to a safe and sustainable supply of water. Stephanie Huel was raised in the tiny town of Kildare, Saskatchewan. In 2020, she graduated from the U of S with a BSA in Environmental Science, minoring in Soil Science. The summer after graduation, she got a job an hour from her hometown as a watershed technician with the Moose Jaw River Watershed Stewards, and she has been there ever since. Over the past year, Stephanie's projects have primarily consisted of the Watershed Wonders education kits, a large drainage network, and building the co-op community food farm in Saskatchewan. So I'm really pleased to introduce our speakers today. Kevin will be presenting first, so I will pass it over to Kevin.
Okay, can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, are you able to see it, I guess?
Not yet.
Okay.
Did you, there we go.
Okay, we're good? Okay, I'll go back to
if you just want to launch the slide, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're okay?
Perfect, good to go.
Perfect, okay, good. So just thank you to the Native Prairie Speaker Series for giving us an opportunity to talk about the work that watershed stewardship groups are doing to combat the issue of invasive species and reduce their impact on the health of our watersheds. Who are the Swift Current Creek Watershed Stewards? Our mission is to enhance water quality and stream health of the Swift Current Creek by promoting awareness and understanding among water users. The goals of our organization to meet this mission are to educate users of the Swift Current Creek watershed on a continuous basis about issues and impacts that affect water quality, monitor water quality and riparian health to assist in cooperative solutions regarding water management issues, and to foster an individual responsibility towards watershed stewardship. So just where is the Swift Current Creek watershed? The Swift Current Creek starts in the Cypress Hills north of East End, runs northwest, meeting up with the Jones, Bone, and Rock Creeks before Duncairn Dam, and then runs from Duncairn through Swift Current, and then north and east until it empties in the South Saskatchewan River west of Beaver Flat. The area in green on the map around Rush Lake, Herbert, and Morse is in the Rush Lake Creek subbasin, which is actually in the Old Wives watershed. But because water can be moved from the Swift Current Creek watershed for irrigation and the town of Herbert's water needs, this area has long been included in the planning for the Swift Current Creek watershed. The Swift Current Creek is the sole supply of water for the city of Swift Current and partially for the town of Herbert. The water also supports roughly 10,000 acres of irrigation, livestock watering, crop spraying, industry, and increasingly recreation. So where is the Swift Current Creek in relation to other watersheds in Saskatchewan? The South Saskatchewan River watershed is to the north and east of the Swift Current Creek. Old Wives is to the south and east. The Milk River or Sodcap area is south of us. And the Moose Jaw River, which we almost meet up with at our most northerly point, is east of us. So why does a watershed stewardship group worry about invasive species? Through consultation with stakeholders, managing and mitigating impacts of invasive species on watershed health was identified as a priority. Riparian areas are susceptible to invasive infestations, especially if not managed properly. Improper management includes improper grazing practices, allowing livestock access to sensitive areas, removal of the riparian buffer through cultivation, and inappropriate development in the riparian area. Invasive plants, root systems, and vegetation are not adapted to being able to carry out the functions of a healthy riparian area that native plants do. The riparian function is degraded as invasive plant species take over, and habitat is removed and biodiversity is decreased. When the riparian area function is degraded, this leads to sedimentation, nutrient loading, and other pollutants to accumulate in the creek or river. This increases total suspended solids, which downgrades water quality, increased nutrients, and the promotion of algae growth, reducing water quality for users and wildlife. Increased sedimentation changes floodplain. So if and ever it does rain again in southwest Saskatchewan or we get runoff, flooding can be made worse, further downgrading the health of the watershed. As the riparian area and floodplain changes, the water holding capacity of the creek or river is reduced. As water quality changes due to invasive species infestation, native aquatic species are displaced, reducing opportunities for recreational fishing. Aquatic invasive species also cause damage to the beach and to water, making them unusable for recreation, and can also cause damage to equipment. So the top picture is just the beach, I think at Lake Winnipeg, covered in zebra mussels. And then the bottom picture is a boat motor covered in zebra mussels. In the Swift Current and Rush Lake Creek watersheds, there is significant irrigation areas, which are at the end of the system. So everything upstream contributes to it. The seeds of any invasive species would flow through creeks and canals and be possibly spread on the irrigated land. Most of the crops grown are for livestock feed, which are then hauled and fed around the watershed and other places, which makes that an excellent vector for invasive plant species to spread across the watershed. Changes to the floodplain and the water holding capacity create issues with water management, managing water resources, which is vital to ensuring there is enough water for irrigation and all water users. So education is key to combating and managing invasive infestations. Education needs to highlight the relationship between reducing invasive infestations and managing watershed health and proper management of water resources. The Swift Current Creek Watershed Stewards and other groups have hosted workshops for producers, industry, and municipalities, focusing on the identification of invasive species and their management. And these workshops also provide an opportunity for networking and having groups work together to manage infestations. In the past, we have sold invasive plant bouquets with models of the invasive plants that are common in our area. Many municipalities, companies, and individuals have purchased these bouquets to help them identify the invasive weeds. In the invasive plants included in the invasive bouquets include leafy spurge, salt cedar, spotted knapweed, purple loosestrife, yellow star thistle, and Dalmatian toad flax. We do not have any of these bouquets available for sale now, as we've sold them all. If there is interest in bouquets, we may order more. But these plant models can also be available from the Montana State University. We have hosted a weed walk within the city of Swift Current to teach residents about how to identify the invasive plants and native plants in a riparian area in the city. These weed walks educate residents why invasive species create issues for watershed health, alert city residents to the invasive plants that are in the city, and that is just not a problem for agriculture or oil and gas. Residents then watch for invasives and know what to do if they find any. Youth education has always been a large part of the work of the Watershed Stewardship Groups. However, due to the inability to present to school and youth groups for the last 2 years, some of the groups have banded together to create educational kits that could be delivered to these groups to help them learn more about their watershed and what they can do to protect it. Invasive species identification is a large component of these kits. These kits are available from the Swift Current Creek Watershed Stewards, Moose Jaw River Watershed Stewards, South Saskatchewan River Watershed Stewards, the Old Wives Watershed Association, and the Wascana Upper Coppell Watersheds Taking Responsibility Group. Funding for this project comes from Water Security and Plains Midstream. Stephanie Huel, the field technician with the Moose Jaw River Watershed Stewards, will talk more about the kits and the activities in the kits to teach about invasive species. Take it away, Stephanie.
All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, looks
Yes.
good.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to keep my camera off just so I don't overwhelm the system. But as Caitlin and Kevin mentioned, I'm the watershed technician for the Moose Jaw River Watershed Stewards. I'm here to talk to you about the Watershed Wonder pilot project, which myself and the 4 other watersheds developed over the last year. But before I start, I just want to talk a little bit about the Moose Jaw River Watershed Stewards. So we are a nonprofit charitable organization that serves to educate about and protect the waters in the Moose Jaw River watershed. Our office is in Moose Jaw. The watershed includes all the contributing area around the Moose Jaw River and Thunder Creek. The Moose Jaw River starts about 30 kilometers west of Weyburn and flows northwest towards the Moose Jaw. Thunder Creek starts southwest of Central Butte and flows southeast to Moose Jaw. The Thunder Creek and the Moose Jaw River join here in Moose Jaw, where it then flows northeast and joins the Qu'Appelle River about 5 kilometers downstream of Buffalo Pound. The Moose Jaw River watershed encompasses 9,360 square kilometers and contains 22 RMs, 2 towns, 10 villages, and the city of Moose Jaw. So other than the Watershed Wonders, we have been working on several other projects this year. The Co-op Community Food Farm is a community garden here in Moose Jaw and was built over the spring and summer and is almost done. Tree for Life was a project that was done in partnership with the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and other watersheds. In our watershed alone, we delivered about 3,000 trees. The RM of Baildon Agricultural Water Management Network is just a really long name, but it essentially means we are helping submit drainage applications for over 200 quarters in the RM of Baildon. So now I'll talk about the actual Watershed Wonders project. I once again want to acknowledge our project funders, the Water Security Agency and Plains Midstream Canada. I'd also like to thank the 4 other watersheds who were involved in the creation of these kits. Kevin already mentioned them. So the Watershed Wonders is a series of 3 loanable education kits designed to teach children about everything watershed related. These kits were developed for students between the ages of 6 and 13. However, any age can use and enjoy them. As I mentioned, Watershed Wonders consists of 3 separate kits that were each designed around a different watershed theme. My Watershed and Me focuses on educating children about their local watershed stewardship group, their connection to the land around them, and the impact of human activities on the environment. Getting Our Feet Wet focuses on educating children about riparian vegetation and soils, water quality, methods to analyze water quality, and beavers and their role in wetland creation. The final kit is Beaver Trails and Cattails. It focuses on educating children about animals within their watershed, native vegetation, the identification of invasive plants, and competition between native and invasive plants. I'll be focusing on this kit. So this is the activity breakdown of Beaver Trails and Cattails. The first activity is investigative activity and it's discussion based. It acts like an introduction for the kit. Follow That Trail gives children experience with animal tracking. Sheriffs and the race both discuss invasive species and I'll be delving deeper into both of them. Finally, herbarium is the final activity and teaches kids about making their own herbarium. As I mentioned, both Sheriff and the race focus on invasive species. Now you may be asking why I would include invasive species in a fun educational kit for kids. I know for myself and many people, invasive species are our worst nightmare and keep us up at night. Well, some of you may or may not be familiar with this graph, but this is called an invasive species invasion curve. Essentially, it shows that from the point of introduction, which is that green dot, as time increases, the area infested increases and the potential for eradication decreases. It is by far easier and less costly to A, prevent the introduction, and B, deal with the infestation when the area covered is small. That is why I decided to put invasive species in the kit. Educating people on invasive species and their impacts can help prevent their introduction and help the identification and removal of new infestations. Which brings me to the first of two activities, which is sheriffs. In this activity, students join their Watershed's Invasive Species Task Force, and using clues provided in the incident report, they identify the criminal invasive species and bring them to justice. Students are given a sheriff badge and 6 incident reports that contain information that may help them identify the invasive plant, such as the color of the flower. They then use that information to match the incident report to the correct unidentified plant. So this activity introduces to 6 invasive species or criminals that can either already be found in Saskatchewan or has the potential. They have versions of yellow star thistle, Dalmatian toadflax, purple loosestrife, spotted knapweed, leafy spurge, and salt cedar. This activity is why Kevin no longer has bouquets for sale, so you can thank me. At the end of the activity, the answers are held in 6 confidential envelopes that contain information about the invasive species. The activity ends with a discussion around practices that farmers, landowners, and the public can make to prevent the spread of invasive species. Now moving on to the race. The race is an educational board game that aims to teach students about invasive and native species, competition, and different management practices. To play the game, first students pick either a grassland or wetland activity set. Grassland and wetland have different possible identities for students to select. And then each student picks an identity, either invasive or native, and is that character for all 3 rounds of the game. So this is the board. It was roughly based on chutes and ladders, but with action spaces. The chutes indicate that one must pick up a movement card. There are also red and green action squares. The red squares are for only invasive species and green squares are for only native plants. If you land on a red or green space and you read the event and follow the arrow to the X. So for example, my identity is leafy spurge and I land on that first red square and that acts as the chute. So you read the event, which is you hitch the ride on a tractor and established on a new field. You follow the arrow down to the red square with the X, and that's your new spot. The race contains 3 different types of cards. The identity cards, invasive and native, which are just the cards with the bee and the alien. Movement cards and control cards. As I mentioned, there are 2 habitats that can be used for the game, wetland and grassland. Each habitat has its own set of identity cards. This is just an example from the grassland set where the invasive is leafy spurge and the native species is needle and thread grass. The identity cards contain information on the habitat, identification, and dispersal. The invasive cards also include information on prevention and control. On the bottom of each card, there are 4 symbols that correspond to an image on the movement cards. The number beside indicates how many spaces can be picked if that specific card is pulled. So just notice that the invasive species that have, they have a greater ability to disperse and they have a number associated with the human or, the human movement or dispersal card. Movement cards represent different modes of plant dispersal and are only used when a player lands on a chute. The player must pick up 1 card, and the card will either be for human, animal, water, or wind dispersal. The player will then move as many spaces as their identity card indicates. Control cards represent different methods of controlling invasives, such as mechanically pulling or using chemicals. There are only 2 control cards in each game. These cards will only be used in round 3 of the race. The control cards are only to be used by those who have a native species identity card. And when used, this card knocks back all invasive species 10 spaces. Now moving on into gameplay. So as I mentioned, there's 3 rounds and each round represents a different scenario. So round 1 is normal conditions. Invasive species are allowed to run rampant. At the end of the game, the students take note who came in first, second, third, and fourth. The game is purposely designed to ensure that invasive species win. Round 2 represents biosecurity measures, or just any measures that people take to prevent the spread of invasive species. So to mimic a scenario where people have implemented biosecurity measures, half of the human dispersal cards are removed. Round 3 represents a scenario, well, it's best case, where biosecurity measures have been implemented and invasive species are being actively controlled. This is where the control card comes in. So native plants can implement the control card any point during the game, and they knock all invasive species back 10 spaces. As a conclusion, students just discussed the outcomes of each round. It is entirely possible that invasive species win each round, but the purpose is to reduce the margin and make sure that native species have at least a chance. Now, moving away from the activities, I just want to briefly mention how the project went. I view the project as a great success. Across all 5 watersheds, there were 51 social media posts that were viewed about 11,000 times. The kits were presented at 18 camps, borrowed by 19 people, and used in 3 schools, and about 1,164 kids used the kits. We created a feedback survey to hear from people who borrowed the kits. The feedback survey was completed 14 times, and essentially everyone thought the kits were fun, informative, unique, facilitated hands-on learning, and taught useful watershed-related topics. Now, if you want to borrow a kit, you can contact directly any of the 5 watersheds. But if you're not sure who's closest to you, you can always send me an email at fieldtech@mjriver.ca or just contact my office. And with that, I'll pass it back to Kevin.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think these kits are a wonderful thing to teach students about invasive species and everything about looking after your watershed, looking after the environment in a fun and easy to learn method. So if there's anybody who's out there who's interested in these kits for whatever group, your youth group you're involved with, for sure, please contact people in your watershed, and we'll gladly get these kits to you. Oops. So what is the Swift Creek watershed doing to manage infestations? And basically, we've been working with landowners to try and control these infestations. The big one that we're looking at is leafy spurge beetle release. Our group has been collecting and releasing leafy spurge beetles since 2009. And we try and do these releases at various sites throughout the watershed, and especially where landowners want to control infestations on sites that are environmentally sensitive, that they do not want to or cannot access to spray. Another thing that we work on is to conduct weed pulls along the creek. We've been doing it almost annually since 2016 with the help of volunteers from Stark and Marsh accountants and the Innovation Credit Union on a day that they organized called Go Green. And so we've been looking at, for the last 5 years, cleaning up a site with common burdock. As you can see from this picture, our volunteers got in there quite a bit, and we're come out covered with burdock burrs. Just kind of shows you how the burdock can transfer pretty easily from one spot to the other by attaching its burrs to clothing, animal hair, things of that nature. We still have some burdock in that spot, but we've put a pretty large dent in it, and we're just hoping to eradicate it to stop downstream infestation. So I guess this is a picture of the site, kind of from the east of the site. Pointer during the flood of 2011. If you look here, there's two trees, just the tops of two trees. That's kind of this where in between those two trees is where the infestation is right now. And so this is what this site looked like in 2015 before we started with the cleanup. It's pretty much right full of burdock. You know, we've got, as burdock's biennial, we have both the old growth and the new growth that we need to get rid of. And really there isn't much there other than burdock in that spot. And so then this is the site just from a different angle after we got completed the weed pull in 2021. It's completely clean. We're hoping it to stay that way, but you know, we'll keep working on it to make sure that it goes away. So the progress of the burdock infestation from 2011 to 2021 shows how invasives can be spread in a watershed and the work that needs to be done to control the infestations. As Stephanie had in her presentation with that graph on eradication, it's much easier to get rid of an infestation when they're small and deal with the spot rather than trying to look at a big one that's gotten out of control. We've also, at the same time, been working on a site with field bindweed, but we couldn't do anything with it this year because right off the bat we stepped on a wasp nest and we couldn't get back to doing any work. So hopefully we can continue on with that to clear that as well. So the other piece of invasive work that the Swift Current Watershed and other groups do is aquatic invasive education and monitoring, which is focused on zebra mussels. The zebra mussels are incredibly invasive and destructive to the ecosystem. They attach to hard surfaces and feed by filtering the water, which changes the native habitat for aquatic wildlife. As I said before, they can damage the beach or make it unusable as they are sharp and can cut feet and anything else. And as this picture shows, they can get into infrastructure and pipes, and they're especially damaging to power generation, irrigation, and municipal water supplies. So what are we doing with this? Well, first big step is education. We've posted large signs at most of the boat launches within our watershed, just reminding boaters to remove all aquatic plants and to drain water from the boat and trailer. And we've also printed educational material telling people to clean, dry, drain, their boats before they move them from one water body to the next, and also pull the plug just to make sure that there's nothing left within their live wells or within their boat that can transfer that from one water body to the next. So we're also conducting a lot of monitoring. The picture to the left is what we call a Portland sampler. It's used for detecting the adult mussels. It's a PVC pipe with cement in it to kind of hold it down. We hang them off of a dock and check regularly during the summer to see if the adult mussels attach. You can also check docks or any hard surfaces in the water or rocks in the water to see if mussels attach to them, because they will attach to hard surfaces. The top picture is we're taking water samples for villager sampling. So these water samples are then analyzed for the presence of the larval stage of the mussels. And the bottom picture is something new that we've started this year. It is eDNA sampling. We are taking water samples to check for the presence of zebra mussel DNA in the water. This will provide an early warning of the presence of zebra mussels in the water body and allow us to start the process to manage an infestation if they are found. Other species that the Swift Current Creek watershed is watching, Prussian carp. We've got some scientific and plenty of anecdotal evidence to show that they are in the watershed. So we're looking to find where they are exactly in the watershed and develop a plan to study further to try and develop a method to minimize their impact in the watershed. Flowering rush is presently not in the South Saskatchewan, not presently in the Swift Current Creek watershed, but is in the South Saskatchewan between the Alberta border and Sask Landing. And our friends at the South Saskatchewan River Watershed Stewards have been active in identifying and removing. And the bottom picture is wild boar. We have not seen much evidence of their presence in the Swift Current Creek watershed, but we continue to educate residents to be on the lookout for them so that the groups that are working on their control can be notified and take actions as required. The Swift Current Creek Watershed Stewards and other watershed groups will continue invasive species education to limit their impact on watershed health and water resource management. So just wanted to put a plug in for a project that we worked on this summer with other watershed groups in the province. And Stephanie had mentioned the Tree for Life. Our groups gave away 27,000 trees this spring to help sequester carbon to mitigate climate change. A part of this project was to get an understanding of people's perceptions on climate change. And I invite you to take part in this survey, if you haven't already, to help us understand what people think of climate change and what we as watershed groups can do to mitigate its impact. And the link to the survey is at the bottom of this page, and it can also be found at the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds website. So just wanted to take a moment to thank the organizations that sponsor what we do. Without their support, we would not be able to do the work that we do. And just thank you to the Prairie Conservation Action Plan for inviting us to be part of their Native Prairie Speakers series. And that's everything.
Thank you so much, Kevin and Stephanie, for the awesome presentation. And I also want to thank you both for the amazing work that you do. I know Stephanie mentioned that people kind of, invasive species is everyone's worst nightmare, and she's right. My eyes kind of glaze over when we have presentation about invasive species, but you guys really take the bull by the horn and are really doing a lot of amazing work to educate kids and the public and landowners about the importance of invasive species and how detrimental they are and how to prevent and manage them. So thank you both for all of the work that you're doing. We do have a few questions from our listeners right now. So the first one is listener Alyssa is wondering if you have any issues with the kits not being returned, the education kits.
We
No.
haven't. You, Stephanie?
No, everyone's really good with returning them, and I know for my watershed we have not had one issue of them coming damaged even. Everyone's really good.
What ages are the kits designed for?
So they were designed for ages 6 to 13, but I've had people younger use them and people older use them, and everyone seems to like it. There's plenty of variety, so you don't have to do every single activity if you find it's too young or too old.
Cool, that's really neat. There's a lot of interest like in other environmental nonprofit organizations. How would you feel about like an equivalent or another nonprofit organization using or modifying the kits? And would you be open to that if they could contact you?
Yeah, we haven't really had much discussion, I don't think, about spreading it to other organizations, but I welcome people to send me an email and we could talk it over and, exchange ideas.
Yeah, there's a listener here from Alberta who is wondering about, named Alyssa. I'll ask Alyssa to contact you. Stephanie, maybe you could put your email into the chat and just send it to everyone, and then anyone who's interested can get a hold of you. And another person's wondering if you have any synergy with Ag in the Classroom. Have you been discussing or working with them on getting this out to more classrooms?
I more have looked at Ag in the Classroom during kind of like research and looking into what other kits and education systems are out there. There hasn't been really any talk with them to help us get kits out, but that is possible for the future.
Yeah, it might be the next steps. It sounds like these kits are really interesting, and it might be worth getting them out there to a bigger audience and just building off of the amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note is that this was a pilot project with funding from Water Security Agency and Plains Midstream to see if they work. And I think it's definitely shown that we have, and definitely will work with anybody else who wants to put them together to help to help spread the word about whatever they want. So environmentally.
Awesome, that's great. We have a couple questions about invasive species. The first one, a listener named Penny says, I'm restoring a 4-hectare wetland. Part of the wetland is overtaken by sow thistle. Is this a problem, or do I just weed whip off the heads before they go to seed? Do you have any comments about that?
I don't know for sure. I think if you keep weed whipping, you probably would be okay with, trying to get, keeping it from going to seed is probably a good first step. And trying to pull as many as you can. And it's only 4 acres or 4 hectares. Yeah, it's a small area. So I think that would probably be a good first step to getting rid of them.
Awesome. The next question is from a listener named Rylan. Have you encountered any mussels through the DNA testing?
We haven't got the results back yet, unfortunately. So don't know. We haven't seen on the Vellager sampling either. We do know that there has been no adult mussels found in the water. So I mean, we're hoping that we don't see any, but I think the Vellager and the eDNA give us an opportunity to, to say, that they are here before that we find the adult. And I think once we get the results, all of our groups will be more than willing to share the results once we do get them.
For sure. And do the results go to a lab for testing then?
Yes, yeah, everything goes to the lab, and I'm not sure, I think the Veligers go to a lab here in Saskatchewan, and the eDNA went to a lab in Ontario.
Okay. Well, hopefully you get the results soon. It'd be really
Yes.
interesting to know.
Yes, yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
We're waiting for them for sure.
Yeah. And the next question, where do you get the beetles for leafy spurge from?
So for the last, I don't know how many years, that through SARM and the plant health officers, they put together collection days at Bizant Park by Mortlack,
Okay.
just west of Moose Jaw. That in that area, they've had quite a, if you drive down the #1, that you see a lot of leafy spurge. So there's beetles were released there many years ago and have collected beetles from there. Other groups, as this beetle collection has moved on, people have been collecting on their own, sites that they've sort of established, and that there's enough beetles there that they can collect for their own use. I know Moose Jaw, you guys, I'm not sure if Moose Jaw has or is going to do some collecting at Walkabout Park. Is that correct, Stephanie?
I believe we're still in the stages of constantly releasing beetles there, and they're
Okay.
not established enough to collect, but.
Yeah, because one of the things that does happen is that the beetles become good enough or are efficient enough at control that they sort of actually, their population declines and you can't collect there. So, but most of them for the last few years have come from Bizant Park.
Okay.
And
thanks for that answer.
And if you're interested in it, either interested in getting beetles, is just contact the Watershed group in your area, because especially those of us in the south do go to Bizant Park in July to collect, and would gladly collect for you and help you with the release.
Awesome. That's good to know. That was actually the next question, is if a landowner has leafy spurge and is interested in getting beetles to look after that. So you said the best thing is for them just to contact their watershed directly. Is there a time of year where a landowner should be, looking for leafy spurge and getting a hold of you? Like, when do you go collect beetles?
Well, the beetles are collected the first week of July. So
Okay.
I guess if you know that you've got the infestation, you'll probably know before then. You'll see the leafy spurge flowering. And so, contact us in June, so that we, know, give us a week or two notice so we know how many that we need to collect, and we'll be able to collect them for you.
Perfect. Thanks. And the next question is about the invasive plant bouquet. Listeners just wondering, is it a real plant or are they imitation?
No, they're cloth models. They're models. They're not real plants. We do have some dehydrated models, that we take around as well, but no, they're not real plants, because you're not allowed to have, most of them fall under the prohibited plant, so you're not even allowed to have, to save the plants, right? So by law.
That's good. Yeah, that makes sense. The imitations look really neat, and I think it's always hard for people to look at a picture of something and then try to find it out in the wild, and having these bouquets available, it gives you kind of a 3D visual of what you're actually looking for. So I think they're a really cool educational tool, and it's great that you're using it for people of all ages. A listener named Joan is wondering if you would share the results of the DNA testing for zebra mussels with the Lake Diefenbaker Task Force Against Zebra Mussels. Are you familiar with that group?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we can do that. I think, I'm not going to speak for other groups, but I know that for ourselves, we will release the results to our stakeholders, through our website and through our newsletters. So, and just we did some of the sampling along Lake Diefenbaker at Sask Landing, Beaver Flat, and Herbert Ferry, just because we're the closest group to those areas. So we would have some results, but we'll definitely, if anybody, we'll share those for sure.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have right now. So I just wanted to thank all of our listeners for catching our webinar today, and hopefully you can join one of our next ones in the future. This webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube probably today or tomorrow. There's just a little bit of processing time. When you leave today's webinar, there'll be a quick 1-minute survey. If you don't mind filling that out, that helps us keep our Native Prairie speaker series going into the future. And Kevin and Stephanie, thank you both so much for the really fascinating presentation today. It was really interesting to see how much work the watersheds are doing to raise awareness about invasive species. So thank you both very much.
Well, thank you again for allowing us, and thank you to everybody who tuned in today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. And there's lots of comments coming in from our attendees. Thank you very much for the work that you do. So I'll just reiterate that. And I guess with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Same to you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.